Hi, it's Marcy Tilton in my studio today, and I have a lifelong love affair with linen. And I just made this little top. This is my new drop pocket pattern little tunic, Vogue 9193. And instead of following the directions, which I wrote, I did something different. I wanted like a really simple little band at the neckline. And to do that, I just used a simple fold over bias. If you look at the inside of this, it's raw on the inside, but that's fine because bias doesn't ravel. It's like a rule of life, like gravity. So let me show you how I do this. I'll start out with a scrap of fabric and line it up. So I want to get this on the straight of the grain. I have this cool little gizmo that helps me find the true bias. So I line that up with this happens to be a selvage. And I'm going to put my heavy ruler on it and I'm going to cut. And how wide is something that you're going to want to play around with. So when you do this, you want to make a test. But what I like to do is, see there's this little space here. I tend to cut the bias wider because it will naturally get skinnier on its own. So the minute you take this bias binding up, move this out of the way, you want to stabilize it. So what I do is I will take this to the ironing board and press it. It's not a tug of war, but just give it a good press. And what will naturally happen is it'll get skinny in the middle and a little wider on the end. Then the secret is to trim it. So I've got a couple of pieces here where I have taken the stretch out already at the ironing board. So to do the next step, I go to my cutting table and I use the rotary cutter like it's another pair of hands, or like it's an extension of my hands. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now go in and trim this as even as I can. And I always play around with the width on a little test swatch before I sew it on my garment. And on my tunic, I did it once, it was perfect, and I ripped it off and redid it because I wanted a narrower bias. So you can make this any width you want, but the secret, see, is to cut it on the true bias, press it to take the stretch out, and then trim it so that it's just the width that you want. And if you want to use a double fold bias, that's what I have here. So I've gone to the ironing board, I've taken the stretch out, pressed it, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing, is I will trim this to an even width, and then I can use either a single or a double bias. And sometimes I don't decide until the end of the project. And the double bias has a fancy name. It's called French bias. So I wish you lots and lots of success when you go to sew bias on the garment. And let me share one more thing with you. When you go to sew the bias on, don't try and sew it at 1/4 of an inch the way it's finished. Stitch it on at 1/2 inch. Give it a press, come over to the design table, trim it to an even 1/4 of an inch, and then wrap it around. That's the way you get perfect, even, the way mine looks here. And the other secret is you never clip this curve. You always keep that curve because that's what's supporting it in at the neckline. Thanks so much. Happy sewing from my studio to yours.